So Final Fantasy VII Remake is coming to PC. Yes, you're gonna be able to pretty much play the game now on the PC version, which honestly I'm just so excited for, because this game definitely deserves to be played on pretty much any platform. It's an amazing game. We had a ton of fun with it last year, which is why in this video we're gonna go over the biggest tips and tricks you need to know in 2021, close to 2022 as a matter of fact. So this is kind of like a in-between year tips and tricks update in case you're playing it right now. So let's jump right in. Now, we've talked about this last year, but the first thing you will want to do in this game is to master those parries with Cloud. This will let you avoid a huge chunk of incoming damage, provide a lot of stagger, and it's a free high damage attack against groups of enemies that might tend to overwhelm you. So Cloud can automatically counter any melee attack when switching your stances into the Punisher mode. You only have a split second to time this right, so there is a bit of a learning curve here, but if you want to have a bit more control over this mechanic, you can also simply remain into the Punisher mode and then just press and hold down the parry button and wait for a melee attack to land. But eventually you will want to master that stance switch counter anyway, as that presents a couple of major advantages that the normal parry doesn't have. First of all, you look 10 times cooler doing it that way, and second of all, if you happen to get attacked by multiple enemies at the same time, say both range and melee, your parry doesn't get cancelled by the ranged attack if it happens to land before the melee attack. So pay attention to your enemy's movements, anticipate and try to match a landing hit with an immediate stance switch to make the most out of this mechanic. Now, speaking of paying attention to your enemies, definitely use assess materia on every single occasion, especially since this is something that you can get very early on in chapter 3 by simply completing an early on combat challenge for Chadley. And every new combat or every new encounter you have, go ahead and use that assess materia on your enemies to see exactly what strengths and weaknesses they present. You can also later on pull up the enemy intel outside of combat to study your opponents, but you will still need to have assessed them first to fully see those weaknesses and strengths appear in the first place. So pay close attention to your enemy weaknesses and use materia and abilities that counter that. For example, against humanoid enemies, these are weak against fire attacks, machines are weak against lightning, and insectoids/amphibians are weak against ice attacks. So carry different materia types on different characters so that your party is always prepared for different situations and different types of enemies, and you're never lacking in any of these areas. This also brings us to that pressure/stagger mechanic I was talking about previously. When you pressure an enemy by exploiting his weakness, you also get to interrupt them and build their stagger meter until they get fully staggered and stunned momentarily. And there's one major advantage that you get during this state, which is the fact that the game also gives you a huge damage multiplier. During this state is when you will actually want to unleash all of your strongest attacks with your entire party to dish out the most amount of damage. But by default, that stagger meter only gives you a 160% damage multiplier, and you can further increase that to over 200%. The easiest to do so is using a simple combo with Tifa, which is ultimately the stagger queen of this game. So the easiest one is going to be to use Unbridled Strength 2 times and then immediately follow up with a rise and fall chain of attacks that will increase that damage multiplier to over 210%. And yeah, up to this point you can go ahead and unleash all of your strongest attacks. Also, since we are on the subject of characters and easy combos, you can quickly recharge the overcharge ability for Barret by simply pressing that button at the end of your normal chain of attacks, which will recharge both of your abilities and also give you the chance to not wait for the animation that long. But moving on to number 4, let's talk about weapon upgrading and the best traits you should focus on as early as possible. When your character levels up, you also gain skill points or SP, even for the weapons that you didn't use in a while. The more SP you get, the more your weapons will increase in levels, which will also open up new weapon cores that give you access to all sorts of different traits. And I definitely recommend to focus on the materia slot cores as much as possible, even in comparison to some of the other ones that might give you more HP or more damage. damage. The reason for that is because this gives you more possibilities to slot in more materia, which means you're going to be able to access more powerful skills and combinations for builds that might become a lot more powerful as you progress more and more in the game. Now also at the same time, to unlock new weapon cores, you basically need to acquire enough SP, which is automatically going to bring your level up when exceeding certain thresholds. For example, to reach level 6 for all of your weapons, which is the maximum in the game, you need to get at least 250 SP. The problem is that if you play only on the normal difficulty or below, you only get about 246 SP, including the 3 manuscripts that you get for each of the characters when completing some of the side content and purchasing these from the Moogle vendors. So the fastest way to reach 250 SP is to just play chapter 16 and 17 Shinra combat simulators and defeat some of those challenges on the hard difficulty, especially the solo challenges for each of the 4 characters, as each of these will provide you an additional manuscript and enough SP to push over 250 and reach level 6 with all of your weapons. From this point on, if you want the rest of the SP points, all you have to do is to play the game on the hard difficulty, specifically to complete certain missions, side content, or defeat certain bosses on that hard difficulty, which is going to be made super easy once you finish the story once, because chapter select becomes available and you can see exactly how many manuscripts a chapter will reward by simply checking that info beneath it. By the way, you can totally reset the SP points over at Chadley by simply paying a little bit of guild to him in case you want to experiment with some of the other traits or if you didn't have enough to make a proper build yet. Now materia is another area that you want to pay attention to when leveling up, because when you finish a fight you don't just get SP, you also get AP, which is ultimately the XP that you get for your equipped materia. Again, only materia that is slotted up in either your weapon or your armor slot will eventually level up when you finish these fights. So it's extremely useful since this will provide you stronger versions of spells as you progress in the game, and you will definitely need them. Like for example, the fireball can become a Firaga, which is a much stronger version of the same spell that provides a lot more damage and stagger. Now at the same time, I would also suggest you pay attention to your materia slots, especially the ones that are linked to one another, because this gives you an option to link materia to one another and create some really crazy combos. Just a few examples that are really strong early on: you can use elemental materia plus any elemental to increase your weapon damage and apply that elemental on every single one of your attacks, assuming that you're coupling these on a weapon. So this will help you a lot more to apply more pressure and stagger against enemies. Also, for example, using AP up and link it with any materia that you want to level up faster will give you a ton more AP at the end of these fights, so you can level up these a lot faster and get those max rank spells easier. Another one would be MP or HP absorb plus any elemental to absorb either mana or health when dealing damage with those linked spells, and there's many more that we will explore in different videos. Moving on to number 6, when acquiring a new weapon, including from vendors or randomly from chests when exploring, you will notice that all of them have unique special abilities listed over there that you can go ahead and immediately use in combat. Now, the more you use these weapon abilities against enemies, the more your proficiency with those weapons will increase. Once 100% proficiency is reached, you can permanently unlock that ability and even use it with different weapons that you haven't equipped before. So definitely worth to do that. On a final note, by default your characters only start with a level 1 limit break, which by default is a pretty strong ultimate. It still deals quite a lot of damage and stagger against most enemies, but there's level 2 versions that are much stronger than that, and you can get these in chapter 9 and chapter 14 respectively. So in chapter 9, when you reach Corneo's Colosseum for the first time and complete some of the challenges, you can already get a couple of really interesting level 2 limit breaks for Cloud and for Aerith. In this case, you will have to complete the solo challenges versus the wild animals encounter. For Cloud, you will get that Ascension limit break, which is an absolutely amazing kind of like cross/slash combo that deals a ton of damage. Meanwhile, for Aerith, also in chapter 9 you get the planet protection. In chapter 14 is when you will get the rest of the limit breaks, this time around for Tifa and for Barret. So for Tifa you get something called the Dolphin Flurry, which is again an amazing ability that provides a ton of stagger against some of the bosses in the game, and also for Barret to get the catastrophe that just obliterates almost any target or group of enemies if you again complete that solo fight versus the wild animals. And that is pretty much it with the biggest tips and tricks in 2021. Obviously, you will want to do a ton of exploration in Final Fantasy VII Remake. This is how you get a ton of additional story content, a ton of new rewards and items for all of your characters, and essentially it just makes the experience way better. There's a ton of replayability to Final Fantasy VII Remake, so you will definitely want to go over the beaten path and just like have a ton of fun with the side content. A big suggestion that I have here is to just complete all side missions before you move on to the next chapter, because otherwise you will have to wait until you finish the entire game to be able to replay those missions again with the chapter select. This is it, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.